Mia Chin sat in seat 17C, her legs barely reaching the floor, swinging gently as she colored in her Disney princess coloring book. The flight attendant passing by smiled warmly at the small girl with pigtails and a pink backpack decorated with unicorn patches. "How are you doing, sweetie?" the attendant asked, crouching down to Mia's eye level. "Would you like some apple juice or cookies?" "Apple juice, please," Mia said politely, looking up with innocent brown eyes that made the attendant's heart melt. "Of course, honey. Are you traveling alone to see your grandparents?" Mia nodded. "My grandma in Seattle. She's going to take me to the Space Needle." "That's wonderful. What grade are you in?" "Fifth grade. I'm 11. The attendant patted her shoulder. "Well, you're being such a brave girl flying all by yourself. If you need anything, just press this button, okay?" She pointed to the call button, speaking slowly and clearly as if explaining to a small child. "Okay, thank you," Mia said sweetly, returning to her coloring book. The woman in seat 17B, a businesswoman in her 40s, glanced over and smiled. "Your first time flying alone?" "Yes, ma'am," Mia replied, carefully staying within the lines of Elsa's dress. "I remember my first solo flight at your age. Scary, isn't it? But look, you're doing great. Just sit tight, color your pictures, and before you know it, you'll be landing in Seattle." Mia nodded enthusiastically, clutching her small stuffed rabbit. To everyone around her, she was exactly what she appeared to be, an ordinary 11-year-old girl on her first unaccompanied flight, completely dependent on adult supervision and reassurance. What none of them knew was that beneath that innocent exterior lay a mind trained in ways no child her age should be. Mia's father, Captain Robert Chin, had been a commercial airline pilot for 23 years before a devastating stroke 18 months ago left him paralyzed on his right side. Unable to fly again, he channeled all his passion, knowledge, and fear into teaching his only daughter everything he knew about aviation. At first, her mother had objected. "She's just a child, Robert. Let her be a child." But her father had insisted with an intensity that bordered on obsession. "The world is unpredictable, Sarah. Knowledge is never wasted. If she knows, she's prepared. If she doesn't." He had left that sentence unfinished, but the implication hung heavy in the air. So began Mia's unconventional education. While other kids attended soccer practice and dance classes, Mia spent hours in her father's study, surrounded by aviation manuals, flight simulators, and emergency procedure guides. Her father, despite his physical limitations, was a relentless teacher. "What's the first thing you do if you lose radio communication?" he would quiz her during dinner. "Squawk 7600, Mia would answer, referring to the transponder code for communication failure. "And if both pilots are incapacitated, assess the situation, verify autopilot is engaged, contact ATC through any available means, and if necessary, take manual control." Her mother would shake her head at these conversations, uncomfortable with the dark scenarios being drilled into her daughter's young mind. But Mia absorbed everything like a sponge. Her father had purchased professional-grade flight simulator software, the same kind used to train actual pilots. Night after night, Mia would practice emergency scenarios, engine failures, hydraulic system malfunctions, electrical fires, total communication blackouts. She learned to read instruments, manage fuel, calculate descent rates, and execute emergency landings. "In aviation, muscle memory can save your life," her father would say, watching her small hands work the controls with increasing confidence. "When crisis strikes, your conscious mind panics. But if your hands know what to do, they'll do it automatically." He had made her practice the same emergency procedures hundreds of times until they became second nature. How to manually trim an aircraft, how to navigate using only visual references, how to execute a dead stick landing with no power, how to interpret weather patterns from cloud formations alone. "Dad, when will I ever need this?" Mia had asked one evening, exhausted after a 3-hour simulation session. Her father had looked at her with eyes that seemed to see something in the distance. "Hopefully never, but if you ever do, you'll thank me for being prepared." Mia had thought he was being paranoid. Now, sitting in seat 17C at 30,000 feet, she would discover just how prophetic his words had been. Flight 447 from San Francisco to Seattle was a routine afternoon service, the kind that pilots flew dozens of times each month. The Boeing 737-800 carried 156 passengers and 6 crew members. Captain James Morrison and First Officer Kelly Tran had flown together for 2 years and had developed an easy rapport in the cockpit. "Weather looks clear all the way to SeaTac," Tran commented, reviewing the flight plan as they leveled off at their cruising altitude of 30,000 feet. "Should be smooth sailing," Morrison agreed. "Let's hope for an uneventful flight." In the cabin, Mia had put away her coloring book and pulled out her tablet loaded with children's games and movies. The man across the aisle, a grandfather type with kind eyes, leaned over. "Playing games?" he asked conversationally. "Yes, sir. Candy Crush," Mia lied smoothly. In reality, she was reviewing a flight simulator app her father had installed, but she had learned to hide this interest from adults who would not understand. "My granddaughter loves that one too. She's about your age. Enjoy your flight, young lady. Seattle's beautiful this time of year." Mia smiled and returned to her tablet, but something had caught her attention. The cabin lights had flickered, just for a second, so brief that most passengers hadn't noticed. But Mia had spent enough time in simulators to know that lights don't flicker on airplanes without reason. She glanced up at the overhead panel. Everything seemed normal. The seat belt sign was off. The air circulation hummed steadily. Perhaps she had imagined it. Then it happened again. A quick flicker followed by a barely perceptible dimming of the cabin lights. The flight attendant passing through the aisle paused, frowning slightly. She picked up the intercom phone to call the cockpit. Mia watched as the attendant's expression changed from mild concern to confusion. "Hello, Captain Morrison." The attendant spoke into the phone, waited, then tried again. "Cockpit, this is cabin. Do you copy?" "Nothing." She hung up and tried again. Still nothing. She moved toward the front of the aircraft, her pace quickening. In the cockpit, Captain Morrison was experiencing his own confusion. "I've lost radio contact," he said to Tran, tapping his headset. "Mine, too," Tran confirmed, adjusting her own headset. "Try backup frequency." Morrison switched channels. Static. He tried the emergency frequency. More static. He attempted to contact any aircraft on any frequency. Complete silence. "Intercom's not working either," Tran added, picking up the phone to the cabin and hearing nothing. "What the hell is going on?" Morrison checked the electrical systems. Everything showed normal. Generators functioning, batteries charged, all systems green. Yet somehow every communication system had failed simultaneously. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "We've got complete electrical power but zero communication capability." What neither pilot knew was that a rare and catastrophic electromagnetic interference event was occurring around the aircraft, caused by an unusual interaction between solar radiation, atmospheric conditions, and the plane's electrical systems. The phenomenon had knocked out every radio transmitter and receiver on board while leaving other systems temporarily functional. "We need to squawk 7600, Morrison said, entering the transponder code for communication failure. But when he checked the display, the transponder showed offline. "Transponder's dead, too." "How is that possible?" Tran asked. "We're flying blind. No radio, no transponder, no intercom. Ground control has no idea what's happening to us." Morrison's training kicked in. "We follow procedure, maintain heading and altitude, try to restore communication. If we can't, we'll need to navigate visually and make an emergency landing." But before either pilot could take further action, the electromagnetic interference intensified. A surge of energy coursed through the aircraft's wiring. The pilot's displays flickered wildly. "I'm seeing multiple system warnings," Tran called out. When the surge reached a critical point, both pilots were suddenly exposed to a brief but powerful electromagnetic pulse that, combined with a rapid decompression as a small seal failed in the cockpit, caused them to lose consciousness almost instantly. The automated systems immediately detected the cockpit decompression and sealed it off from the main cabin, protecting the passengers but also trapping the unconscious pilots in a compromised environment. The aircraft, now on autopilot with no conscious crew, continued flying straight and level at 30,000 feet. For several minutes, no one realized the pilots were incapacitated. The flight attendants, unable to reach the cockpit via intercom, assumed the pilots were busy troubleshooting the communication issues. Passengers continued with their activities, only mildly aware that something unusual was happening. Mia Chin, however, was putting pieces together that the adults around her could not see. Her training had taught her to read the subtle signs of aviation emergencies, the flickering lights, the failed intercom, the way flight attendants were now congregating at the front of the aircraft, speaking in urgent whispers. Most tellingly, the aircraft was flying too straight, too level, with no corrections or adjustments in its flight path for over 10 minutes. She knew exactly what that meant: autopilot with no human oversight. The senior flight attendant, a woman named Patricia, was trying the cockpit door entry code. She had entered it twice now with no response. Protocol required the pilots to unlock the door from inside within 30 seconds. It had been nearly 2 minutes. "We need to use emergency access," Patricia told her colleague quietly, not wanting to alarm passengers. She pulled out the emergency override key and opened the cockpit door. What she saw made her blood run cold. Both pilots were slumped in their seats, unconscious. Captain Morrison's head had fallen forward onto his chest. First Officer Tran had collapsed sideways, her headset askew. The instruments were still functioning, the autopilot engaged, but the humans who should have been flying the plane were incapacitated. Patricia immediately grabbed the oxygen masks in the cockpit and placed them over the pilots' faces, hoping the pure oxygen would revive them. She checked for pulses. Both had heartbeats. They were alive but completely unresponsive. She needed to walk the cabin and ask directly if anyone on board could fly. As Patricia emerged from the cockpit, her face pale and hands trembling, Mia knew instantly what had happened. She had seen that expression in her father's simulation. Debriefs countless times when he presented worst-case scenarios. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia said loudly, her voice carrying through the cabin. "I need your attention, please. We are experiencing a technical emergency. Both of our pilots are temporarily unable to fly the aircraft. Is anyone on board a pilot?" The question hit the cabin like a thunderbolt. Passengers gasped. Someone screamed. A baby started crying. The peaceful afternoon flight had suddenly transformed into a nightmare. "Please, is anyone here a pilot?" Patricia repeated desperately, scanning the faces of 156 passengers. No one raised their hand. Anyone with any flight experience at all. Silence. Fear. Prayers whispered in multiple languages. Mia's hands gripped her stuffed rabbit tightly. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "If you know something that could save lives, you have an obligation to act, no matter how afraid you are." But she was 11 years old. Who would believe her? Who would trust a child? The businessman in 17A spoke up. "Can't you just follow the autopilot until we land?" Patricia shook her head. "The autopilot can maintain our current heading and altitude, but it can't navigate us to an airport, adjust for weather, or execute a landing. Without pilot input, we'll fly until we run out of fuel and crash." More gasps, more prayers. A man in first class stood up. "I flew helicopters in the military, but that was 20 years ago, and I've never flown anything this size." "Please come forward," Patricia said. "Any help is better than none." As the man moved toward the cockpit, Mia made a decision. She unbuckled her seat belt and stood up. "Excuse me," she said quietly. Patricia didn't hear her. The woman in 17B did, though. "Sweetie, sit down. The adults will handle this. But I can, honey, I know you're scared, but please sit down and let the grown-ups work." Mia's voice came stronger now. "I know how to fly." Several passengers turned to look at her. Some smiled sadly, thinking it was a child's innocent claim. Others looked annoyed that a little girl was interrupting during a crisis. "That's sweet, honey," an older woman said. "But this isn't a game. Real pilots will help us." "I'm not playing," Mia insisted, her voice rising. "My father was Captain Robert Shin. He taught me emergency procedures. I've trained on flight simulators for 2 years. I know how to fly this plane." Patricia finally turned to look at her. For a moment, their eyes met. Patricia saw something in this child's expression that gave her pause. Not childish fantasy, but genuine knowledge and determination. "How old are you?" 11. "But I know the procedures. I can read the instruments. I know how to navigate and land. Please let me help." The helicopter pilot, now in the cockpit doorway, looked back at Mia and shook his head. "Ma'am, with all due respect to this young lady, we can't put a child in the pilot's seat. I'll do my best to figure out these controls." Do you know what the EFIS displays show? Mia asked him directly. Can you identify the PFD versus the ND? Do you know how to adjust the FCU or work with the FMS? The man blinked, not recognizing half the terminology she had just used. Patricia made an instant decision. What's your name? Mia Chin. Mia, come with me. Sir, she addressed the helicopter pilot, you come too. Between the two of you, maybe we have a chance. As Mia walked up the aisle toward the cockpit, passengers stared in disbelief. This small girl with pigtails and a stuffed rabbit, whom they had smiled at condescendingly an hour ago, might be their only hope of survival. The cockpit was more impressive than any simulator Mia had ever seen. 2 unconscious pilots, a bewildering array of displays and controls, and the overwhelming weight of 161 lives depending on what happened in the next few hours. Do you really know what you're doing? The helicopter pilot asked skeptically. Mia moved to the first officer's seat and began scanning the instruments systematically, just as her father had taught her. Her hands trembled, but her mind was clear. Autopilot engaged, mode LNAV and VNAV, she said aloud, reading the flight control unit. Altitude maintaining 30,000 feet. Heading 340 degrees. Airspeed 480 knots. Fuel showing 8,900 kilograms remaining. All engines normal. All systems showing green except communications. Patricia and the helicopter pilot stared at her. This was not a child guessing. This was someone reading instruments with competence. How long until we run out of fuel? Patricia asked. Mia did quick mental calculations, something her father had drilled into her constantly. At current consumption rate, approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes of flying time remaining. Can you land this plane? Mia took a deep breath. I've never landed a real aircraft, only simulators. But I know the procedures. The biggest problem is that we have no radio communication. We can't contact air traffic control, can't coordinate with airports, can't get ground guidance. What do we do? Mia's mind raced through everything her father had taught her. First, we need to assess our exact position, then identify the nearest suitable airport, then descend and navigate visually to that airport, then attempt landing. All without radio communication. The helicopter pilot asked. Yes, it's called NORDA. No radio procedures. Aircraft do it occasionally when radios fail, but usually they still have transponders so ground control can track them. We don't even have that. Patricia leaned against the cockpit wall, overwhelmed. This is insane. She's 11 years old. Would you rather I try? The helicopter pilot asked. Because I can barely identify half these instruments, and I've never flown anything with jet engines. No, Patricia said finally. I think Mia is our best chance. God help us all. Mia touched the control yoke carefully, feeling its weight and resistance. I need someone to help me. I can't fly and monitor everything alone. Tell me what you need, the helicopter pilot said. What's your name? Martin Ross. Okay, Mr. Ross. I need you to sit in the captain's seat and read out instruments when I ask. Can you identify the altitude indicator? Martin looked at the primary flight display. The number that says 30,000. Yes, that's altitude. The one next to it is airspeed. The artificial horizon shows our pitch and bank angle. Those are the 3 most important right now. Martin settled into the captain's seat, carefully moving the unconscious Captain Morrison aside. Okay, I think I can do that. Mia pulled out the chart book and started analyzing their position. Without GPS or radio, I need to navigate using dead reckoning and visual landmarks. We were heading from San Francisco to Seattle. Flight time about 2 hours. We departed at 2:15 p.m. We've been flying for approximately 55 minutes. She traced the standard route on the chart. We should be somewhere over southern Oregon, probably near Crater Lake. If I'm right, we need to identify landmarks to confirm our position, then navigate to the nearest suitable airport. How will we know which airport? Martin asked. We'll look for it, Mia said simply. Once we descend below the clouds, we find a city, identify the airport, and land there. I'm going to disconnect the autopilot and take manual control. Are you ready? Wait, Martin said. Shouldn't we leave the autopilot on as long as possible? No, Mia explained. We need to descend soon while we still have plenty of fuel. Every minute we stay at 30,000 feet is a minute we can't see the ground or identify landmarks. Also, I need to feel how the aircraft handles before we attempt landing. Better to practice now while we have altitude. It made sense. Martin nodded. Okay, I'm ready. Mia placed her small hands on the control yoke. Her feet barely reached the rudder pedals, but she could manage. Disconnecting autopilot in 3, 2, 1. She pressed the autopilot disconnect button. A soft alarm chimed. Suddenly, the aircraft was under her control. The yoke had weight and resistance unlike anything in the simulators. The plane wanted to continue straight and level, but Mia could feel every subtle adjustment through her hands. For a moment, she felt overwhelmed. Then her father's voice came back to her. The aircraft wants to fly. Don't fight it, work with it. She made a tiny adjustment to the yoke. The aircraft responded perfectly, banking slightly to the left before she centered it again. You're doing it, Martin whispered in awe. Maintaining heading 340, altitude 30,000, Mia confirmed. Now I need to execute a descent. I'm going to reduce power and lower the nose gradually. Her small hand reached for the throttle levers. She pulled them back slightly, feeling the engines respond. Then she pushed the yoke forward gently, watching the altitude indicator begin to decrease. Descending, she announced. Target altitude 10,000 feet for visual navigation. Descent rate 1,500 feet per minute. The aircraft's nose dipped. Passengers in the cabin felt the descent beginning and exchanged worried glances. In the cockpit, an 11-year-old girl was flying a commercial airliner through pure knowledge and determination. At 25,000 feet, Mia leveled off temporarily to assess their situation more carefully. Through the cockpit windows, she could see the landscape below starting to take shape: mountains, forests, and what looked like a large body of water to the west. That must be the Pacific Ocean, she said, pointing. Which means we're definitely over Oregon. I need to identify a landmark I can match to the chart. Martin looked at the terrain below. What are we looking for? A city, a mountain, a lake, anything distinctive I can find on this chart to confirm our exact position. For 10 minutes, Mia scanned the landscape while maintaining steady flight. Her eyes caught something, a massive crater-like formation with a deep blue lake inside it. There, she pointed. That's Crater Lake. I recognize it from photographs. Which means we're approximately 180 miles north of the California border. So where's the nearest airport? Patricia asked, having returned to the cockpit after trying unsuccessfully to calm the passengers. Mia studied the chart carefully. Eugene is about 100 miles northwest. It's a good-sized airport with long runways. That's our best option. How will we find it without navigation equipment? Visual navigation, Mia explained. We follow Interstate 5 north. It runs straight through Eugene. Once we see the city, we look for the airport. Martin shook his head in disbelief. You're going to navigate a commercial airliner by following a highway. That's how pilots flew before radio navigation existed, Mia said. And it's our only option now. She adjusted the heading, bringing the aircraft to a northwesterly course. Below them, she could make out the thin line of Interstate 5 cutting through the Oregon landscape. There's the highway, she confirmed. As long as we follow that, we'll reach Eugene. The descent continued. At 15,000 feet, turbulence shook the aircraft. Mia's hands tightened on the yoke, making constant tiny corrections to keep the plane steady. Her father's training was paying off. Her hands knew what to do, even when her mind felt overwhelmed. Altitude 15,000 feet, Martin called out. Airspeed 350 knots. Good, Mia acknowledged. I'm going to continue descending to 10,000 feet, then level off and navigate to Eugene at that altitude. Patricia watched this small girl flying the aircraft with growing amazement. Mia, how are you staying so calm? I'm not calm, Mia admitted. I'm terrified, but my dad taught me that in an emergency, you do what needs to be done. You think about being scared later. At 10,000 feet, Mia leveled off again. The landscape was much clearer now. She could see individual buildings, roads, and landmarks. Following the highway became easier. How much longer to Eugene? Patricia asked. Mia checked the time and did calculations. At our current speed, approximately 12 to 15 minutes. Then we need to identify the airport and set up for landing. And you know how to land this plane. In theory, I've done it hundreds of times in simulators, but this is different. The weight, The wind, the reality, it's all different. But you think you can do it? Mia was quiet for a moment. I have to do it. There's no other choice. The minutes ticked by. Mia kept the aircraft steady, following the highway north. Her eyes scanned constantly, checking instruments, looking for landmarks, monitoring the weather. Her small hands never left the controls. Then, in the distance, she saw it, a medium-sized city sprawling across the landscape. That's Eugene, she announced. Now I need to find the airport. She knew from her studies that Eugene Airport was located northwest of the city center. She scanned the area looking for the distinctive layout of runways. There, Martin pointed. Is that it? Mia looked where he was pointing. 2 runways in a rough cross pattern, several hangars, and the unmistakable layout of an airport. That's it, she confirmed. That's Eugene Airport. Now comes the hard part. Landing without any communication or ground support, Mia circled the airport at 8,000 feet, assessing the situation carefully. She could see emergency vehicles beginning to gather on the ground, suggesting someone had noticed the non-communicating aircraft circling overhead. They know something's wrong, Patricia observed. Good, Mia said. At least they'll have emergency equipment ready. She studied the runways. I need to choose which runway to use. Wind direction is crucial. She looked at the flags visible on buildings below, checking which way they were blowing. Wind appears to be from the southwest. Runway 16 is our best option. We'll be landing into the wind. How do you know all this? Martin asked. My father drilled it into me. Landing into the wind gives you more control and a shorter landing distance. Mia took a deep breath. I'm going to begin our approach. This will take about 10 to 15 minutes from our current position to touch down. I need absolute silence in the cockpit unless I ask you something. Can you both do that? Patricia and Martin nodded. Mr. Ross, I need you to read out altitude and airspeed when I ask. Can you do that? Yes. Okay. Mia's voice was steady despite her racing heart. Beginning approach to runway 16. She began a wide descending turn, setting up for what pilots call a left downwind approach, flying parallel to the runway in the opposite direction, then turning to align with it for landing. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced precision. Throttle adjustment, yoke pressure, trim wheel. Every movement was deliberate, based on hours of simulation training. Altitude, she asked. 6,000 feet, Martin called out. Airspeed 280 knots. Too fast. Reducing power. Mia pulled the throttle back further, feeling the engines, decreased thrust. The aircraft descended smoothly. Below them, the airport was growing larger. Mia could see clearly now. The runway, the terminal, the emergency vehicles lining up. Extending flaps to position 1, she announced, moving the flap lever. The aircraft shuddered slightly as the wing flaps deployed, increasing lift and allowing her to slow down further without stalling. Altitude 4,000 feet, Martin called out without being asked. He was learning. Airspeed 220 knots. Good. Turning to base leg, Mia banked the aircraft to the left, perpendicular to the runway. This was a critical phase. She needed to judge the timing perfectly. Turn too early and she would overshoot the runway, turn too late and she would undershoot it. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Flying the pattern is about geometry and timing. You can calculate it, but you can also feel it. Trust your instincts. Flaps to position 2. More drag, more lift, slower speed. The aircraft was transforming from a fast cruiser into something more controllable for landing. Altitude 2,500 feet. Airspeed 180 knots. The runway was perpendicular to them now, off to the left side. Mia judged the distance, counted to 3, then began her final turn. Turning final approach. The aircraft banked left again, and suddenly, through the windshield, the runway appeared directly ahead, a long stripe of concrete beckoning them toward Earth. On final, Mia breathed. Extending landing gear, she moved the gear lever down. The aircraft shuddered as the landing gear descended and locked into place. 3 green lights confirmed all gear were down. Gear down and locked, Martin confirmed, reading the indicators. Flaps full. Mia extended the flaps to their maximum landing position. The aircraft slowed further, now flying at approximately 150 knots. The runway was dead ahead, growing larger every second. Mia could see every detail now, the markings, the threshold, the numbers painted on the concrete. Altitude 1,000 feet. Airspeed 145 knots. Perfect, Mia whispered. We're on glide path. In the cabin, passengers pressed against windows, watching the ground rush up toward them. Some prayed, some held hands, some simply closed their eyes, unable to watch. Patricia stood in the cockpit doorway, her hand over her mouth, watching an 11-year-old girl attempt the impossible. At 500 feet, Mia began the final phase, the flare. This was the most critical moment. Too high and the plane would stall and drop hard. Too low and they would slam into the runway. The timing had to be perfect. Altitude 400 feet. The runway filled her entire field of vision now. She could see the threshold markers approaching rapidly. 300 feet. Her hands made micro-adjustments to the yoke. The aircraft's descent slowed slightly as she began raising the nose. 200 feet. Almost there. The runway was rushing up to meet them. Mia's training screamed at her to pull back on the yoke, but not too much. Not yet. 100 feet. The concrete was so close now. She could see individual cracks and patches. 50 feet. Now Mia pulled back on the yoke, raising the nose. The aircraft's descent slowed dramatically as the nose lifted and the wings provided maximum lift. For a moment, they seemed to float over the runway. Then, with a jolt that jarred everyone aboard, the main wheels touched down. The impact was harder than it should have been. Mia had flared a bit too late, but the landing gear held. The aircraft bounced slightly, came down again, and this time stayed down. "We're down," Martin shouted, but Mia's work wasn't finished. The aircraft was traveling over 100 miles per hour down the runway. "Thrust reversers," she said, pulling the thrust levers into reverse position. The engines roared, creating reverse thrust to slow the aircraft. "Brakes," she pressed down on the brake pedals with all her strength, feeling the aircraft's momentum fighting against her. The aircraft decelerated rapidly. Mia could see the end of the runway approaching. They needed to stop. They had to stop. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on, stop." The brakes screamed. The tires smoked. The aircraft shook violently from the deceleration, but it was working. They were slowing. 3,000 feet of runway left. 2,000 feet. 1,000 feet. The aircraft's speed dropped below 50 knots, then 30, then 20. At 500 feet from the end of the runway, Flight 447 came to a complete stop. For a moment, absolute silence filled the cockpit. Then Patricia started crying. Martin slumped in his seat, shaking. And Mia Chin, 11 years old, slowly released the control yoke and began trembling uncontrollably. "You did it," Patricia whispered. "Dear God, you actually did it." In the cabin, the silence broke as passengers erupted in applause, cheers, and sobs of relief. An 11-year-old girl had just saved 162 lives. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft within seconds. Paramedics rushed aboard to attend to the unconscious pilots, who were beginning to show signs of regaining consciousness. Captain Morrison would later say he remembered nothing between trying to restore radio communication and waking up in a hospital bed. Mia was led from the cockpit by Patricia, still trembling, still processing what had just happened. As she emerged into the cabin, passengers stood and applauded. Some touched her shoulders as she passed. Others simply stared in amazement. "You saved us," a businessman said, tears in his eyes. "You saved all of us." The woman from 17B, who had told Mia to sit down during the crisis, approached her with tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't listen to you. You're a hero." Mia didn't feel like a hero. She felt exhausted, scared, and desperate to see her mother. As she descended the aircraft stairs, she was met by airport officials, emergency responders, and a growing crowd of people. News helicopters circled overhead. Reporters shouted questions from behind barriers. "How old are you? Where did you learn to fly? Were you scared?" An FAA official stepped forward, a stern-looking man in his 50s. "Young lady, I need to speak with you about what happened up there." Mia looked up at him with tired eyes. "Am I in trouble?" His expression softened. "Trouble? You just accomplished something extraordinary. We need to understand how an 11-year-old was capable of flying and landing a commercial airliner." Over the next hours, Mia repeated her story multiple times: her father's training, the flight simulators, the emergency procedures drilled into her memory. The FAA officials listened in amazement, then requested to interview her father. When Captain Robert Chin received the call, he wept. His wife Sarah, who had always questioned whether the intense training was appropriate for their daughter, finally understood. The knowledge that had seemed like obsession had saved 162 lives. By evening, Mia's story was international news. 11-year-old girl lands commercial jet after pilots incapacitated. Her face appeared on every news channel, every social media platform, every newspaper in the world. The aviation community was divided. Some praised her quick thinking and skill, while others questioned whether a child should possess such knowledge. The debate raged for weeks. But for Mia, the most important moment came when her parents arrived at the hotel where officials had taken her. Her mother burst into the room and wrapped her in the tightest hug of her life. "I'm sorry," Sarah sobbed. "I'm sorry I ever questioned your father's training. You were prepared, and you saved all those people." Her father arrived in his wheelchair, tears streaming down his face. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "But I also hope you never have to use those skills again." "Me too, Dad," Mia said, climbing into his lap as she had when she was younger. "Me too." The investigation revealed that the electromagnetic interference had been caused by a rare combination of solar activity and atmospheric conditions compounded by a minor electrical fault in the aircraft, a 1 in a million event that left both pilots briefly unconscious while somehow leaving the aircraft's autopilot functional. Captain Morrison and First Officer Tran both recovered fully and returned to flying, forever grateful to the small girl who had saved their lives along with everyone else's. Mia Chin became the youngest person ever to receive accommodation from the FAA. She was invited to the White House, appeared on talk shows, and received letters from around the world. But the attention made her uncomfortable. She was still an 11-year-old girl who wanted to play with friends, watch cartoons, and be normal. One quiet evening, 6 months after the incident, Mia sat with her father in his study, surrounded by the aviation manuals and simulator equipment that had prepared her for that fateful day. "Do you regret teaching me?" she asked. "Never," her father said firmly. "You were prepared when the world needed you to be. That's all any parent can hope for their child. But I was so scared, Dad. The whole time I was terrified." "Being brave doesn't mean not being scared," he explained. "It means doing what needs to be done despite the fear. You did that." Mia looked at the simulator equipment. "I don't think I want to be a pilot anymore. Is that okay?" Her father smiled. "It's perfectly okay. You've already proven you can fly. Now you can choose whatever makes you happy. Maybe you'll be a doctor, or a teacher, or an artist. It doesn't matter. You'll always know that when it mattered most, you were capable of something extraordinary. I just want to be a regular kid again. Then that's what you'll be." But Mia Chin would never truly be a regular kid again. She was the girl who, at 11 years old, had taken the pilot's seat at 30,000 feet when the plane went silent. She was the girl who had saved 162 lives through knowledge, courage, and determination. And while she might return to coloring books and stuffed rabbits, somewhere inside her would always be the pilot who brought everyone home. The story of Mia Chin would be told in aviation circles for generations to come, not as a miracle, but as proof that preparation, knowledge, and courage can come in the smallest, most unexpected packages. And somewhere in the sky, on routine flights between cities, pilots would occasionally look at young passengers and wonder, could another Mia be aboard, quietly carrying knowledge that might one day save lives? The answer, as the world had learned, was that heroes come in all ages, and sometimes the smallest hands can guide the largest machine safely home.